Okay, House Judiciary called to order. The Secretary will note the roll. We haven't had any change in members, but we have quite a bit of change in staff, so we're going to do that. First, I'm going to introduce my secretary, who put in her notice is leaving in 2 weeks after 6 years of here. That's the best part about you. Yeah, so I wrote her a scathing letter. She'll never get employed again. You know, so it's, yeah, and I'm buying billboards around town where she's moving. Yeah. But Sierra is moving to Austin, where her husband's business is expanding. And so she'll be the lone Republican there. Anyway, but thank you so much for all your hard work over such a long period of time. Anyway, so we're going to move. We're going to do introductions. We're going to start with the Democratic staff, if they don't mind. Yeah, please. And we're doing this because these are the people that do all the real work, and so you should at least get a good look at them for once.
Hi, my name is Kendall McGregor. I'm a policy intern for the Democratic Caucus. I'm currently in my 3rd year at the University of Arizona. I'm a double major in political science and pre-law, and I'm from Chandler, Arizona.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jana Hearn. I'm a staff attorney and policy advisor for the Democratic Caucus.
Thank you very much. Let's do majority staff. Oh, majority staff. Let's see, where is Paul here? Do we have Thomas? Yeah, and Thomas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and representatives. My name is Thomas McDonald. I'm a majority policy intern. I'm currently a senior at the University of Arizona, majoring in political science and minoring in philosophy.
There's so many great jobs in philosophy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, representatives. My name is Paul Vollmer. I'm a policy advisor and staff attorney with the House Majority Caucus. I've been here for about 2 months. Before that, I spent just under 5 years as a prosecutor at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, where I predominantly handle dangerous offenses arising out of the East Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's hear from the pages. And 2 brand new pages this year. Our goal is to make sure you want to do this again by the time the year's over, okay? I notice we have 2 brand new pages, and that's, you know.
Well, my name is Madison, and this is my first session as a page, as you mentioned. I am studying economics, political science, and French at Arizona State University, and I'm excited to work with you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Esther. This is also my first session as a house page. I'm studying philosophy, political science, and psychology at Arizona State University, and I'm very excited to be here as well.
Very good. And then we have research staff. Yes, somebody's got to go first.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Samantha. I'm currently a senior at Northern Arizona University. I'm double majoring in sociology and criminal justice, and I'm the intern for Judiciary Committee.
And you served in the Army, right?
Yes,
also.
sir.
How long?
I was in for 2 years, sir.
2 years. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did that for Mr. Blackman. He said,
Finally, not alone.
Thank you, sir.
I beg your pardon.
Well, you're Air Force.
Thank you.
You're Air Force. But
Right.
That's okay.
back when the biplanes were going, huh? Anyway.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Isabella Russian. I was on the Judiciary and Health and Human Services Committee last year as a page, and I'm really happy and grateful to be here with you all again. So, thank you.
Yeah?
Right. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Lauren Cook. I'm the research analyst for the Judiciary Committee, and I just want to give you a very important reminder. The amendment deadline is noon Tuesday for this committee. I repeat, it is noon Tuesday for this committee. Thank you.
Is that it? That's your only introduction?
That girl is all business.
Yeah, this is going to be a short session. That's all right there.
You betcha.
All right, we have 2 bills on the agenda. We're going to do them in the order in which they're published. We're going to start with House Bill 2036, the fentanyl heroin bill. We've heard this bill 2 years ago, but we're going to try to pull it over the finish line this year. So, Lauren, please. There's this. Oh, no. Press. Please, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record again, I'm Lauren Cook, Research Analyst for the Judiciary Committee. House Bill 2036 establishes a mandatory sentencing range for persons convicted of specific offenses involving the sale, transporting, or manufacturing of heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, or fentanyl mimetic substances. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Any questions for staff? Thank you. I see the sponsors here. Representative Pierce.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, colleagues, first I want to say how collegial this group appears to be. I would hope that carries on to the floor later on so we can get in and out before some of us have an earache. Now, this bill was brought to me from constituents in my district. I think, frankly, I think that mandatory sentencing needs to be reviewed. However, in this case, I think I would wish that all of you would have an open mind as to what the subject that we're talking about is. Fentanyl is dangerous. It's a killer. A small amount can kill you. And we have people from Prescott that have come down that have lost family and lost friends to this drug. Where it comes from China through Mexico and into the United States, it is not like other drugs at all. So I would hope that each of you would have an open mind listening to what is said by the people that have come down from Prescott. So with that, are there any questions?
Any question for the sponsor?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
how is this bill different from the bill we heard 2 years ago?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lawrence, as you'll recall, I am the only unelected member of this body, and I wasn't here 2 years ago. I don't believe it's a lot different. I think it's very, very similar. But those questions you can ask the people that you will hear from.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pierce, I don't know if this question should be directed to you or someone later in the lineup as far as who's going to give testimony, but I want to know, as far as on the possess or use or possess for sale portions of this bill, is there a specific amount of is there a quantity that the individual would have to have in their hand or in possession that we're looking at? And so I guess I'm trying to determine, if there is a quantity, what is it, and how did we determine that number? And if you want to refer that to someone later on, but I just wanted to get that question out there.
I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Roberts, I think you should ask each person that testifies, because originally this bill was primarily at the pushers of the drug and those that sell it. And I think we have altered that somewhat, but I believe that's a good question for each person that will testify.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Pierce, and again, you may not have the data on this. It's kind of the factual stuff, but do we know, or do you know, how many convictions under 13-3408 have received sentences that are historically that are less than 5 years already? And if you don't know, that's fine. We'll see if we can get that data.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Fincham, I don't know that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Pierce, you said that you did think that mandatory minimum sentences needed to be reviewed. Can you tell us why you think that?
You know, I'm gonna.
Sure.
Can I interject here? I'll let him answer the question, but really that doesn't go to this bill.
That's
so. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Engel. That is different, but there are people sitting behind me that I have worked with in the past that I think we have too many people that are incarcerated that need treatment, instead of being incarcerated. I think that needs to be reviewed, but I think, and frankly, we can't afford to keep doing what we've been doing. However, this drug is different than other things that I would say are need to be reviewed. This is a dangerous drug, just the tiniest bit, and it's laced in marijuana. It's laced in, I've heard bananas. It's laced in, it's a bad drug, and those that are selling it need to have some kind of. They need to be in trouble. They need to be incarcerated. And furthermore, there are people that have been caught selling the drug that are already out in the street again, and that's wrong. But back to your question, I think there are some things that non-dangerous people that are in jail should be out being a person in society, paying taxes and contributing to society. And I think we have ruined lots of families by having what we have right now.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have somebody who wants to spearhead this
Chair,
conversation?
Mr. Chair, I had a
I'll get right to you. I just want to ask this question first.
Yes, I think Tim Wiederanders from the Courier is here with some people, and I think if they speak, then I'll come back if you'd like to have more questions.
Here's what I want to do, and we'll get to your question in just a second. We have somebody who's opposed to this who has to catch a flight. So what I would like to do is have one of the main supporters of this come up and speak first. Then we'll get to the person who has that timeline issue, and then we'll move on to just yeses, then just nos. But just so you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pierce, this bill also imposes a mandatory minimum for heroin. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that different than the bill that was rejected 2 years ago? Do you know?
No, it's exactly the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, the bill was never rejected. It just did not go to the full body.
That's a rejection of the
I
type.
believe it passed the House.
Yeah, but it didn't go over to full body in the
Okay.
Senate.
Thank you.
Yes.
Your bills were rejected. This one just had a problem.
A lot of things are going to get rejected, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank
so
you.
much for collegiality.
So,
Down the old
who did
drain.
you suggest, and are they here? Who's it you thought would be the first speaker for?
Mr. Chairman, I think, I don't know who you have signed in.
We have lots of people signed in, but you must have somebody you want to.
Tim Wiederanders.
Is Tim here?
Probably, yes.
Oh, please, yeah. Don't be shy. Are you signed up to speak?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, please. And then who's the person who has to leave?
Miss Molly Gill.
Is Molly Gill here? Okay, you will be next. We're going to do like 2.5 minutes of opening comment and then open it up to questions, if that's okay.
That's quite all right.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Wiederanders. I'm the senior editor for the Daily Courier and Prescott News Network in Prescott. I've been in the business for 32 years, and over the past 14 months, we have conducted a campaign called Stop Fentanyl Now. And this began because 2 young men in our community died from what they thought was taking Percocet. It was actually a mimic, it's called a mimic M30 drug. There's no verifiable proof of where that came from, but it may have come from across the border to the south. What this has done, from my point of view, is you see the drug dealers in the community, and they get caught up in the system. They get caught with 23 pills. I've seen that one. 200 pills, 500 pills of these drugs that can and will kill you. The challenge here that I see is that in the past 14 months, very few of the people who've been caught with these drugs that they're selling have done time in jail or prison. If they have, and this is just a handful, it is because of other drugs that they were caught with. For example, methamphetamine, which carries a mandatory sentence. prime example is a gentleman, 19 years old, who was arrested with these mimic pills. Through court proceedings and investigations, he was linked to one of the deaths in Prescott Valley, a gentleman with the last name of Friedrich. The gentleman I'm talking about, who is now in jail, received a 1-year jail sentence for selling narcotics. They essentially dismissed the fentanyl charge because it doesn't carry any teeth. Following that, he has 7 years of probation ahead of him. Others who have been caught with the numerous...
You're coming up to the end of your time. Just
Okay. Others who have been caught with numerous numbers of pills received only probation.
Any questions for the witness?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so the fact that you're a journalist, editor type, tells me that you probably have done some pretty significant research into kind of the facts surrounding your particular area that you cover. Is that correct?
I'd like to say so.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Sir, can you tell me, you say that these individuals didn't receive any, I'm paraphrasing what you said, substantive penalty, that they were right back out on the street, that they were not charged with this because it didn't. So do you know how many convictions would be affected by this, where they've received sentences that are less than 5 years, or they were pled down, in the example that you gave, was it pled down to 30 days in the county jail and then they're right back on the street? Can you help me fill in the blanks on that so I can understand it better?
I don't have the exact numbers that you're seeking, largely because, for example, we wrote an editorial this past Sunday about this topic, urging people to come here and support the bill. The statistics that I was able to use were 898 people overdosed that killed in the state of Arizona in 2018. Those are the latest numbers that are available. 70% of those involved fentanyl. So we're dealing with a slow turn on the statistics.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I have another question, if you don't mind.
Please.
So have you also done any research, sir, on how many repeat offenders might be involved in this? And the reason I come from a law enforcement background, so I understand that quite often the same people start turning up, especially when you have an aggressive enforcement action. You're picking up the same people for the same thing repeatedly. Do you have any information on that?
I do believe that's the case, but it is anecdotal evidence of the commander of Partners Against Narcotics Trafficking,
Okay.
which is in Yavapai County,
Right.
telling us that they're seeing the repeat offenders. I don't have the nuts and bolts, how many
Okay.
they saw.
Mr. Chairman, and sir, do you know if there's somebody here from either the law enforcement community or the prosecutorial community, or even the defense community, for that matter, that might have a better understanding of what we are seeing as far as repeat offenders of this?
I do not believe that's the case,
Okay.
because this is specifically a community effort. We wanted you to hear the stories from the victims' families and the real on the ground folks who have experienced this.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Chair, sir, I asked this question before. It disturbs me that it didn't pass last time. What was the difference between today's bill and the bill 2 years ago that didn't make it through the Senate?
To speak frankly, I believe it's because the prosecutors and law enforcement community were the only people behind it last time. And that was judged as an effort to just categorically stronger sentencing. And this time we see that we have the deaths in the community and the people who've been affected by it.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
do you know if there is a difference in the wording in any way of these two bills?
I believe it is very slight, but I do know that there were some changes made.
You wouldn't know, Mr. Chair, what those changes are? Would anyone know?
Not off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Staff want to take it, or have we compared the two? We'll provide you with that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, sir, so from your testimony and the sponsor's testimony, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm gathering here, is it kind of sounds like we have more of an issue with the manufacturing and the distribution of these substances more so than obviously there's an issue, but as far as what we're trying to fix is the manufacturing and the distribution of these substances. That's the main problem. Would you agree that's probably the most pertinent portion of this bill that needs to be addressed?
The easy answer is yes. For clarification, this was not intended to be a bill about users. This was about the dealers.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to put this question out there now, and for anyone else that comes up, you can feel free to answer the question in the future. Would you have any issues with amending the bill to focus on distribution and manufacturing versus, because I'll just be frank with you, my issue with this bill right now currently is I don't want to continue down the path of putting substance abuse users in prison without doing something on the back end to help them with their substance abuse treatment. There's many issues. We could spend hours talking about that. What I don't have a problem with on this bill is focusing on the manufacturing and the distribution of it. That I do believe needs to be addressed. So back to my original question. Do you think there would be issue with amending the bill to focus on manufacturing and distribution versus possession and use?
I don't see a problem with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Molly Gill with FAM.
Yeah, just 2 minutes, kind of an opening statement, and then we'll open up for questions if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for accommodating my schedule today. My name is Molly Gill. I'm the Vice President of Policy for FAM. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working here in Arizona to support sentencing reform and prison reform. I'm going to speak very generally about mandatory minimum sentences as a policy. I know there are other people behind me who have a lot more data than I have to share, and also a lot of stories about how this is working on the ground. I want to speak about mandatory minimum sentences generally because I feel we're in a key moment in history where we should be reevaluating them. In the last 30 years, more than
I just
30
would ask you to try to keep it specifically to this bill. I don't need a presentation on all mandatory minimums. How is this bill going to be affected if we go to mandatory minimums?
Well, I would say, first off, I want to acknowledge some values here. Fentanyl is a serious and deadly drug. FAM is not against prison. We're not against punishment. We are for accountability. What we are for is punishments that fit the crime and the offender. And this bill is going to fail on that count. Under this bill, if I sell 1 gram of heroin, I am going to get a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. If I bring in 50 pounds of heroin across the Arizona border, I'm going to get a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. Now, I think we all recognize that those two people have done very different things. They have very different culpability levels, and they may be deserving of different sentences. I would also say that this bill is going to target people who are distributing and possessing with intent to sell, who are themselves substance abusers. We have a stereotype in our minds that all drug traffickers are kingpins, that they are the evil villains we see on crime TV shows. But there are people in this room who had loved ones who were not that. They were just as addicted to these substances as the people to whom they gave their drugs, shared their drugs, used their drugs together, and yes, sold drugs to others. It is very common for opioid addicts to sell drugs to one another and share drugs together. Under the law, that is possession with intent to sell or distribution. That carries a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence under this bill. So I think the very serious question proposed to you today is, do you want to lock up those people for 5 years in prison? Now, I'm not saying no one deserves prison or no one deserves accountability. What I'm saying is, do you want to use indiscriminate incarceration against all of the people involved in these kinds of transactions? And if your answer to that is no, then you need to start thinking about
10
a different
seconds.
solution, such as, for example, giving judges more discretion and allowing judges to individualize these sentences. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Gill, thank you for coming today. You mentioned the fact that mandatory minimums remove the individualized aspect of justice. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So under this bill, there's no quantity threshold for me to receive a mandatory minimum. Quantity is obviously a very important factor indicating culpability. I'm more culpable if I'm bringing in 50 pounds than if I have a gram on me. It also doesn't allow judges to consider important things like criminal history, personal, mental health. Perhaps I'm a person with a mental illness and I'm self-medicating by using drugs, and I'm sharing and selling those drugs with others to feed my own addiction. They would get a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence under this bill. It doesn't consider factors like need for treatment, whether I've received treatment in the past. And I would also just add that the mandatory minimum is always the minimum. The judge can always do more. And so I am not afraid that the person bringing 50 pounds of heroin into the state of Arizona is going to get a very heavy sentence from Arizona judges. That punishment is going to be individualized for them in the other direction. What I'm saying is that we need to make sure we can go both directions.
Thank you.
I have a question. Should we remove the maximums?
You're reading my mind.
You could certainly consider that. You could make them
I
higher.
know what I can consider. I'm wondering what you consider. Do you think we should remove the maximums?
Well, FAM stands for Families Against Mandatory Minimums and not against maximum sentences. So I would say that FAM's position on that would be that it would be acceptable to increase the maximums. However, I will add the caveat that I think for drug offenses generally, we are punishing people far too much as it is.
I'm just saying, if there's times when you say we've gone beyond the pale on the minimums, perhaps we're not doing harsh enough on the maximums. You say that could actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a maximum 15 and maximum 20-year sentences here in this bill. Speaking hypothetically, theoretically, in the real world, I suppose there could be someone out there who deserves 15 or 20 years or more than that. My only issue is I want the judge to have the discretion to decide that, and I want the judge to have the discretion to decide the bottom as well as the top.
Very good. I think you were first, you were second, you were third, unless I missed it.
I just have one question. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, it occurs to me in just the discussion that we're hearing here, the community surely knows the dangerous nature of fentanyl beyond that of heroin. I mean, it's out there. People know that this is bad juju. So when an individual, and I guess I'm asking, where FAM might come down on this. So when an individual is distributing something that, quite frankly, is a poison knowingly, how is that not homicide?
Well,
I mean, it seems to me to be the intentional poisoning of somebody for profit.
Well, I will take issue with the word
Mr. Chair,
intentional.
point of order. I don't know if that question goes to this bill.
Sir, it goes directly to this. Because Mr. Chairman, what we're trying to do is understand
Hold on.
how we might
Hold on.
penalize somebody.
He asked me a question, so let me think for a second. No, it's all right, because it does go to the intent of the underlying bill. In other words, the bill is saying that there should be a harsher penalty because of the the danger to the community. It's a little over top to call it murder, but, it's your question.
Well, but Mr. Chairman, I
Thanks
guess
for the question.
to just defend, I'm trying to get to the philosophical understanding. If somebody's doing something intentionally, I'm not a big fan of mandatory minimums. I think the chairman has actually called out something I like, and that is just remove the maximum. Which begs the question: if individuals are doing this intentionally, knowing full well that the potential outcome of the use of this is death, in exchange for a couple of bucks, can you help me with where FAM might look at that and say yes? And maybe you've already answered this. I'm trying to form this into a question that you can actually.
I think I know what you're asking, and the issue that I take with your question is the word intentionally. There are other people who are far more expert on the drug situation in your community, but what we are hearing at FAM and nationwide is that most people are not aware that fentanyl is in the drug supply to the extent that it is. Most sellers are not trying to poison and kill their clients. It's a bad business tactic. You want repeat customers, frankly.
Yep.
I'm not trying to be crass. I'm just trying to get to the point.
I get it.
And we understand that fentanyl is now in all kinds of drugs, and people don't know what they're selling, and people don't know what they're buying. I think that any person who is addicted does not take drugs, wanting to risk death. I don't think any seller sells drugs wanting to risk the death of their client. So that's the issue
That's a fair
that I
enough
have.
answer, Mr. Chairman.
When fentanyl's involved, and when it's mixed by people who have amateur understanding of chemistry, the risks are far higher. Same thing with heroin and what it's cut with, far higher to have catastrophic effect than a lot of other different drugs, correct?
Well, fentanyl is very deadly. But I mean, the other thing is these drugs are being cut far away from the markets where they're being sold. And so by the time the drugs make it from the factory where they were cut to the street where they're being sold, people literally don't know what they have in their hands and they don't know what they're buying.
But we have in this country you can't sell dangerous products because you didn't manufacture them on the legal market. I mean, you are then held responsible for the product in which you're representing for sale. And so this, a illegal product, which is highly more, has a much higher ability to hurt people than almost anything else on the market, heroin included, should be then treated to the harshest extent in my eyes. Is that not?
I have to respectfully disagree with you there.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that people selling drugs with fentanyl in them shouldn't be held accountable. I'm simply saying they should not get a mandatory minimum sentence, because then you're going to be indiscriminately incarcerating people without individualizing that punishment towards them. And frankly, you're going to be wasting taxpayer dollars and prison resources on people who may not need to be in prison for 5 years. If someone only needs to be in prison for 1 year and we put them in prison for 5 years, we've just wasted $100,000 of taxpayer money that could be better spent elsewhere. We've wasted a prison bed that could hold a more dangerous person. That is not increasing public safety. We need to be laser focused on how we use our prison bed resources and how we use our taxpayer dollars, and mandatory minimums fail on that count.
And again, to that point, there are people who take rational decision making and saying, look, I'm not selling anything with fentanyl on it because I will go to prison immediately. So there are people who make, even who are drug dealers, make rational choices. And if you do change the parameters of the sales question, you are going to get less of it. Well, is it to that point?
Yes, it is to that point.
Sure.
So
just call it out.
Well, when you're waxing eloquent, I'm reticent to interfere with what you're saying.
Well, I appreciate that.
So here's the hypothetical that might address what you're talking about. If someone is selling, for example, a quantity of marijuana that they received from another party, and they are not aware that it's been laced with fentanyl, under this bill, after they are arrested, after the marijuana is tested, after the results come back, they would have originally been charged with the sale of marijuana, which does not contain a mandatory minimum. They would then be subject to a mandatory minimum because they unknowingly sold marijuana that was laced with fentanyl.
Correct.
So that's the difficulty that we have. The other difficulty would be that I'm drinking coffee this morning, but if someone came by and dropped fentanyl into my coffee and I'm caught in possession of this, I would then also be subject to that mandatory minimum. for
No,
possessing
it's not
fentanyl.
possession.
Well, that would be possession.
If you were going around selling that coffee to
Right.
Mr. Roberts
there's no
over there.
threshold amount.
Yeah.
There's no threshold amount in this,
But
and
yeah.
I would be subject to the mercy of whatever county attorney decided to charge it.
And I
that's
think that's
part of the
Mr.
issue.
Roberts' point also, that he would like to see a little bit more threshold language in this bill.
It's one of the complex problems with this bill, and I think this goes to your point, ma'am. The lack of it. There are situations clearly where the person will not know, or did not know, or could not even have
Correct.
known that the drug that they were possessing or even selling
Okay.
had fentanyl.
That's
Mr.
not to
Chair.
my point, so we're going to move back to the original question, and you can bring that up when you have your chance to speak.
Mr. Chair,
No, is it to
I
that
thought
point?
I was next.
No, he still has the
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
It's still his
I'm
turn.
glad that Mr. Rodriguez actually brought that up, because now it's helped me crystallize the question I think that I wanted to ask you originally. I do have a little bit of problem with this being a first-time charge, and because this body has been very focused on recidivism and the repetitive nature of criminal acts. What if this were not an applicable charge on the first go-round? Certainly on the second. If we're going to talk about repetitive behaviors, okay, you got to pass on the first one. You didn't know what you were selling, but it's come back hot. What do you think FAM would do about second and subsequent chargeable events? I'm not talking about the first time you got picked up, prosecuted, you go through the system, you do your time, whatever, you're back out on the street. You've gotten a warning shot across your bow. If there is a second interaction, yeah, now it goes to a mandatory minimum. What do you think FAM's position would be with that?
FAM would oppose that bill. FAM opposes all mandatory minimums on the principle that we believe in individualized sentencing. Even for repeat offenders, the judge needs the ability to look at that person and his entire background and his role in the offense and what drove the crime and his needs and what would be the sentence that would make the public the safest. And we need that individualization in every case, for every kind of drug, whether the person is a first-time offender or a repeat offender.
To that point,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Molly, so you've mentioned mandatory minimums and FAM's stand against mandatory minimums several times now. So I want to address mandatory minimums and the reason that I believe they were initially put in place, because it's a valid reason. And I don't necessarily, I'm not saying that I'm arguing for, but it is a valid reason, and I want to understand where FAM stands on this issue. It's my understanding mandatory minimums were put in place simply because before that happened, we had an elongated history of, and I'm not trying to put judges on the spot, but we had judges that had histories of of being too lenient for too long, and so mandatory minimums were put in place. So I understand FAM is against mandatory minimums, but do you have any suggestion, because you're basically saying you want to remove mandatory minimums. What's the solution to making sure we don't swing the pendulum so far back in the other direction that we go back to being way too lenient? I'm all for the judge having taken into the totality of circumstances and being able to make an educated decision because they've taken in all the facts. However, I have an issue with our current system in the state of Arizona when we have so many judges that effectively, you could say that they're elected, but in reality, if you're in the right county, it's almost next to impossible to get them out of a seat. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I would say a couple things. One is that I wouldn't underestimate the the role of the public in being a safeguard on this. I'm sure you've heard of the Brock Turner case out in California, a young man who received a 6-month sentence for a sex offense. That judge who imposed that sentence was later removed. So the public can speak out about these things, and we do have elections to act as a safeguard on judges that we perceive are being too lenient. Other ways that other jurisdictions have dealt with this is that they've created sentencing guideline systems where the guidelines are flexible and advisory. They give judges a window for the typical kind of case, and if the judges want to depart from that window, they have to provide some explanation for it. At the federal level as well, prosecutors are able to appeal sentences that they feel are too lenient. And I can tell you from in the federal level where this happens, prosecutorial appeals are rare, and when they do appeal them, they win about 65% of the time, which is a pretty good batting average.
The federal system is so different than
I agree.
ours. Okay.
But I'm saying that these are things that you can discuss here in Arizona as an alternative to mandatory minimums.
Okay. I think we're going to go to Mr.
Thank you,
Lawrence.
Mr. Chairman.
Hey, you got to wait your turn.
I almost want to say boo-hoo, boo-hoo. FAM is so worried about the $100,000 bed, and I'm thinking about people that are dying from fentanyl, dead bodies, not sleeping in those beds, but people being killed by fentanyl. They are dead. They are gone. Their families will never see them again. Fentanyl is the cause of their death. And you want to limit the penalties for someone out dealing this death drug. I find that reprehensible. I'm sorry that FAM takes that stand.
If I may respond, we actually, again, we do not oppose punishment for people selling fentanyl. We simply want there to be discretion in how much punishment is imposed so that punishment can be individualized to fit the crime and the offender. And I agree with you that deaths from fentanyl are absolutely tragic. I'm here today with a woman named Janice Hanks, who has lost a son to the opioid crisis, and Janice doesn't want this mandatory minimum sentence. I hope you'll hear from her today. There is a reasonable difference of opinion about these policies. I would also add that the other reason that we oppose these policies is that they simply do not work. If we want to prevent future deaths from fentanyl, mandatory minimum sentences are not going to do that. If you give a mandatory minimum sentence to one person who has sold fentanyl on the street, you have incapacitated one fentanyl dealer for 5 years. You have also created a job opening in the job market. Now there's an opening for a street seller of fentanyl. Someone is going to come in and take that job, and you have the exact same problem that you had before you gave that person
To
a
that
5-year
point,
mandatory
Mr.
minimum.
Chair,
Please.
if an individual knows, hey, he just got 5 years, don't you think that might discourage someone from selling? And if 2 people get sentenced to 5 years, and if 10 people on the street start talking about the sentences, don't you think that will affect those who sell fentanyl?
No, I do not, and that's because there's absolutely no evidence that supports that. The severity of punishment is not what deters people. What deters people is the certainty of being apprehended and punished. This is why when we're speeding down the highway and we see a police car, we all slow down, because the certainty of apprehension just went through the roof. I may not even know the fine that I may get for speeding. I don't care about the fine that I will get for speeding. I suddenly care because now there's a police officer who may arrest me. So what we need is better law enforcement. We need to address the driving factors of this, the substance abuse that's leading to this. We need to get at those things. Just increasing severity of sentence has never been proven to deter people from drug activity, and I think it will not deter in this instance either.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
philosophically, we differ. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Just to let your members know, I'm going to try to get through our 2 bills by 11, just so you know, okay? But that would be our outer mark. I have Representative Engel next. Did you want to be on this to ask questions? I don't remember if you ever raised your hand or look.
No, Your Honor. Your Honor.
I say we go now.
I'm getting into court mode, so we better move on.
Okay, very good. So, Representative Engel. You just showed
Mr.
interest.
Chairman and Ms. Gill, just while we have you here, and you've already talked about your preferred approach would be to give judges discretion, is there anything else you would like to tell the committee and the public about how your approach would differ in terms of trying to reduce the use of fentanyl and heroin?
Well, I do think that we need to start thinking very seriously and investing very heavily into drug treatment in the community, in prisons, after people leave prison. And I know the state has taken really bold steps to do that. I know there's been funding thrown at that, and I think, frankly, that is just a far more productive approach to this than trying to incarcerate our way out of this problem. So I would encourage the state legislature to keep doing those good things they've been doing to try to increase the availability of treatment. I think that could make a real difference.
And to that point, I don't disagree with any word of that, but I do believe that this is so dangerous that it deserves a higher penalty. So we're on the same page on that. I'm running funding for diversion programs this year for the counties, and we're also working at post-conviction release efforts and stuff like that. So that does not exclude this. This is an outlier in activities. That's why I'm hearing the bill.
Mr. Chair, to that point, the current penalty is well within, it's between 4 and 10 years. If all we're talking about is a more effective presentation or prosecution, we can still get to where you want to go. The fact remains, fentanyl is a dangerous drug. It has resulted in a significant amount of deaths, but our current structure allows for all that to be taken into account without having to mandate someone go to prison.
And to your point, this structure has worked in other areas where we've had crises with certain types of drugs, and I think that if we put this in the toolbox of prosecutors, it will help us as a society to curb this activity.
If I may respond, I respectfully have to disagree.
I'm
If
sure you do.
mandatory minimum sentences worked, we would not be having this conversation today.
So, Madam, we'll have none of that. I'm sorry. This is not a forum for applause or anything like that. Please do not do that, or I'll ask you to leave. So, this is a hearing for the members. We're trying to make a decision on policy. This is not a political forum. So, but I know that you had nothing to do with that. So, crime from the 90s, when they introduced minimum sentencing, has radically decreased, and I think a lot of it you can be point to the fact that we've gone to a more incarcerative structure. Now that we have the opportunity to say, okay, let's go for some of the systemic things that are causing this, and I think that's what we're trying to do. This is a circumstance where I think that the toolbox can work in both directions. We can have a harsher sentence and more treatment and more ability for training at the other end, and this should serve the public safety very well.
If I may respond to that, there's simply not evidence to support the idea that the massive crime decline we've enjoyed in this country is attributable to mandatory minimum sentences. It's been studied extensively. There's no causal connection.
I've read as many studies probably as you have, and it is hard to draw a straight line, but it certainly is interesting how behavior's changed.
Well, I would also say we had the rise of the opioid epidemic at a time when we had mandatory minimum sentences for all of these different kinds of drugs. So that is also something that speaks against their effectiveness.
And Matt, there's always going to be things that are outliers because of certain types of activities and markets, highly addictive, very difficult to treat. So yes, there is the opioid crisis, which I don't think any of us think we can incarcerate our way out of.
Well, I would simply say that also don't use mandatory minimums for that then.
Yeah, I'm sure we're gonna disagree.
I think we've reached an impasse.
I put the bill up, so I don't agree with that. There was to that point. Is that yours?
No, I have a question.
Okay, I don't see anybody.
I had it to that point.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I heard it, but I didn't see it.
And Mr. Chairman, the discussion that you were both just having about what you categorized as as an outlier, the surge in opioids, their addictive properties, that against the backdrop of what we had traditionally had for mandatory minimums, perhaps this new substance requires a completely different approach rather than reapplying the old approach to something that, as you said, is completely new. So I think what we're getting at here is that this is tragic. All of these communities are being hit hard, not only Mr. Pierce, but even mine. This is devastating families. And incarcerating folks who need treatment we often look at the singular person that is incarcerated, but we also need to consider the families from which this person is taken. We're taking out potentially a help or a head of household, a parent, someone that could potentially be in the workforce, contributing to the community, being stable, paying taxes. The secondary and tertiary effects of incarceration where it's not appropriate is devastating to our communities. And I think that's really the discussion that we're having here. We're focused on what
And the word appropriate, the word appropriate is exactly right. I have a level of appropriateness that you don't, and that is the real discussion we're having here.
To the point, Mr. Chairman.
Let him answer mine to the point first.
You have an opinion about your level of appropriateness, which you believe is more effectual here, and my opinion about the appropriateness is different. I would disagree that your appropriateness is better than mine.
I don't think I stated it that way.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
No.
Thank you.
Did you have a point?
Mr. DeGrazia is saying that these poor people that are in prison as users. We're talking about dealers. We're talking about the guy who's out selling the drug.
Or gal.
And that's different. We're not talking about marijuana dealers. You may want to have lower penalties for them. Okay, I'll think about that. But as far as fentanyl, I won't think about that. If you're dealing fentanyl, you're dealing a drug that kills.
Let's go to Mr. Robertson, then let's try to move on a little bit here.
Certainly.
You can catch your flight sometime soon.
And I know other people want to speak.
Yeah, and we're going to move through, not repeat things. So.
Mr. Chair, Molly, so I understand, I'm going to touch on the mandatory minimum thing again. Just knowing that FAM's stance on mandatory minimums, would you agree that if we did some work to the bill and focused it more on manufacturing and distribution and less on possession, that would be a move in the right direction? I'm not going to ask if FAM would support it, because I'm not suggesting we remove it, but would you agree that would be a move in the right direction?
I think that if you wanted to improve this bill significantly, you could focus on very high quantity sales, and also perhaps put an intent requirement in here that the person knew that fentanyl was in the drugs that they were selling. I mean, there's a very simple solution here, which is simply to remove the sentence that says it's not eligible for suspension of sentence, probation, pardon, or release from confinement until the person has served the sentence imposed by the court. I think simply by striking that language, FAM could support this bill.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem. So, who do we have next on the forum? We're going to do the fours, then we'll do the against, and we're going to just try to move through. So, if you don't think you have anything new to add, don't feel pressure to come up. But if you do,
Mr. Richard Haddad.
And we're going with 2.5 minutes, and then questions. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Richard Haddad. I'm the news director for Western News and Info. We operate 10 newspapers in northern Arizona, most of them very small communities. What I would just like to convey is in all my 24 years of serving northern Arizona, I have not seen even the 3 to 4 years when it comes to fentanyl. I have not seen these people go to jail. When we were young and our parents said, you have to be home by 10 o'clock or here's the penalty, it worked. It worked in many cases. And just because there are other good things we should do doesn't mean we eliminate this other good thing we should do. Yes, we should be working on reform. We should be getting the less dangerous offenders out of prison. We should. But when it comes to fentanyl, 1 to 3 grams can kill you. To give you some perspective, you're talking about a grain of sand is 11 grams. A grain of sand of fentanyl can kill 3 people. And we have seen it kill our children. When I was a kid, I lived in Colorado. Fireworks were illegal, but they would bring them over. Even in middle school, we would buy them from people who were selling them to us. And we would challenge ourselves, and I'm sure people on this board has done this, to hold it as long as we can and then throw it. Because teenagers and youth, we do silly things. One of the things I remember was a paper grenade. It was paper, And the worst that could happen is I might burn myself or maybe have to go to the hospital for a finger injury. If somebody deliberately sold me a real grenade, hidden, and handed it to me knowing that they knew it could kill me, is that not a dangerous crime? The state of Arizona, as well as the federal law, has mandatory sentence for dangerous crimes. Is this not a dangerous crime? Worse yet, we have even higher penalties for dangerous crimes against children. If somebody walked into a school with a rifle with 10 bullets in it, how many bullets would it take to have mandatory sentencing if one of those bullets was delivered into the body of a child? And yet that's what these fentanyl dealers are doing. They're delivering a deadly item into our children and many others with no consequence of any serious nature. It breaks my heart as I see the headlines in these papers throughout our group in northern Arizona where young people who thought they had a paper grenade die. I hope that you will consider this. FAM has some great arguments,
Your time is
but
up.
they are wrong about this. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
may I subscribe to all of your papers, sir? Thank you.
Thank you. And
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, sir, thank you very much for your, I like some of your analogies are very good. Where would you say that people are not going to jail for this? Okay, so we've got and there's really three entities that if we wanted to place responsibility on for that, I think they're limited. One is the law enforcement community, one is the prosecutor's office, and one is the judge. In your estimation, knowing that you still have to live in that community and drive through, where do you think the breakdown is?
honestly, I think the breakdown is, and somebody asked this earlier, what's the difference between this bill and 2 years ago? It's probably somewhere in the range of 2,000 Arizona dead people. That's the difference. We have not seen, with our current system of prosecution, the breakdown is we have not seen any teeth in the bill. FAM suggested we take out the teeth.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that's, if you don't mind, sir, that's not the question, that's not the,
Sure.
You're not answering the question. My question is very succinct.
Okay.
Is it a breakdown in investigation, in case prep? Is it a breakdown in a prosecutor won't prosecute? Or is it a breakdown in a judge won't met out a penalty? Two of those three are elected officials.
I would say it's a breakdown in the system of prosecution and the judges not seeing, and this is the best of my assumption, not seeing that we're talking about something that is incredibly dangerous. And without a mandatory sentence, there is a big push right now, and I actually agree with it, to get non-violent criminals out of jail. Let's not put the users in jail. But a seller, we need to treat them differently. And I think the entire system is not treating them differently. And if you ask some of the families who are here tonight behind me today, if it should be done differently, it should be done differently. And earlier someone mentioned, well, what about there's no minimum amounts in this bill? And that's true. But when somebody is selling something that a grain of sand can kill 3 or 4 people, why should we be arguing about minimum amounts? There has to be some type of a stand, and I'd like Arizona to be one of the examples, such as other states who have done this. Arizona should send a message to the drug dealers, whether they be in Mexico or China, that Arizona is closed for business for fentanyl, and they will go somewhere else. And FAM said, well, and Ms. Gill, all due respect, they do a lot of good, but they're wrong on this bill. Because they said, well, somebody else will just take their place. But I don't think so. I think the more the reputation of Arizona being firm on fentanyl, we will see a reduction. But we still need to do everything else we can. This is only one part of the building block in a large dam that needs to be built to stop this from
Okay,
happening.
we have
Thank
a
you,
to
Mr.
that
Chairman.
point by the vice chair.
No, I have a question, not to a point.
Mr. Fincham, are you done?
I am, sir. Thank you very much.
you.
Sir, thanks for coming today. I agree also that those who distribute this drug should be placed in prison. because it is very dangerous. I'm concerned about those who possess the drug. You said a number of people or children and people have died, have been killed by this drug. Those that possess this drug, do you agree that could be a change in this piece of legislation?
I do agree. I was listening to that discussion, and I feel like the possession, if it were to be clearly known that the intent was not to sell, and if we think about it as human beings, isn't that what it's always about, intent? I mean, we all can make a mistake, but what our intention is should be what is judged. And I would agree that the possession should not be the focus. It should all be about sales.
Thank you.
To that point,
Please.
Mr. Chair, sir, so kind of along the same line of discussion, you brought this up earlier and to the point that Representative Blackman just made. So I agree that the possession factor and the whole argument, we don't want to continue putting substance abuse users in prison. But you also talked about the minimum aspect. And unfortunately, we're in a circumstance that this particular subject statute tends to look at minimum amounts as a delineation in regards to whether or not, if they have a certain amount in their possession, there's an intent to distribute. So that's the reason why that subject comes up, whether or not, and I would like to know how those the amounts we've derived on those particular numbers, but unfortunately that's kind of the situation we're in and why we have to discuss that. And up until now, until fentanyl has come around, when we're talking about, like you said, a grain of sand, it really magnifies the problem. So do you have a suggestion on how we delineate between someone that is mere possession for use and possession with the intent to distribute on this? On heroin, it's a little more of a, the quantity is different, because fentanyl is such a small amount. So do you have any suggestions in that arena?
In that arena, and where my mind goes, thinking about these names of these young people, if somebody is trying to sell it, we have to put it this way, fentanyl has changed the game. The laws also need to be changed. If somebody is intending to sell to make money, knowing that they're peddling a poison, and they absolutely are there to profit from peddling that poison, I don't care if it's 1 bullet in the gun or 40 bullets in the gun. One will kill. And again, we wouldn't be talking about mandatory sentencing if somebody walked into a school and shot a child. And that's what's happening. So my suggestion would be, if we can prove intent to sell and distribute, then the mandatory sentence should be there, whether they have 10 pills or 500 pills. Now, and as we discussed earlier, there is no maximum beyond, I mean, we can go further, there is a maximum, but we could go further. If a judge is looking at somebody who has 10 pills, go with the 5-year minimum. If they have 2,000 pills, which we have seen even this year, massive quantities of this coming into the United States, then they should obviously take that as a case by case. But without the minimum, we really do lose, and what we've been doing is not working. It is clearly not working. So without the minimums, we do need to look at that.
One more, and then we're going to do one more, and then we're going to try to move
Thank you.
If I may clarify, so on the subject of fentanyl, is your stance that if someone was found in possession of 1 grain of fentanyl, that we should prosecute them under the mandatory minimum?
If they were trying to sell it, knowingly sell it with the intent to profit, then yes, I would say there should be a mandatory sentence. If we're truly going to take a position on this, if Arizona is going to take a stand and say we will not tolerate the sale of fentanyl in this state, then we should not be saying, well, is 1 pill too many? I mean, because it's not a gram. In my mind, it's the intent to sell something. What's the package that they're trying to, and especially when it's a package that looks like something else, that is a landmine for our young people. You're basically spreading these things out, waiting for them to die.
So, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, what you're saying is caught in the act of actual sale is what you're saying? Yes. Not you're saying take possession out of the factor.
Yeah, and again, I do agree that possession should not be the focus here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be here all day.
So, Mr. Chair.
Everywhere you go, they do that, right? They do. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, sir, thank you for coming today. Have you met with the elected county attorneys in the northern counties and discussed this issue with them?
I've met with one.
Which one was that?
Sheila Polk.
And did Ms. Polk indicate to you that she was not prosecuting these cases in accordance with your wishes?
I think that she has done her best to prosecute, but again, I said this system has been muddied. And the system has been muddied because of the history of so many other drugs and the fact that what's been coming up in this discussion, are we talking about users? Are we talking about this? Well, how much did they have? I believe that if we don't take at least one step forward, and it may not be the perfect step, but
Well,
it is a step,
And
it
to
will
that
save
point,
lives.
she signed up for the bill, and she spearheaded this conversation the last time it was offered. So I think you can say the prosecutor wants the bill as it is.
Well, I'm trying to figure out whether or not he's still
Okay.
dissatisfied with the way in which the case is.
Because I think the prosecutors would like this in their
Well,
toolbox.
she's not
at
the
least
only
some of them.
she's not the only prosecutor.
No.
And so-
But during discussions with her, she has told me that she's discussed it with other prosecutors, and they would like to see some stiffer penalties that they could feel confident about, that when they face the families of these people who have lost children, they can say there will be justice this time.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, if we're talking about a stiffer penalty, that points to lifting the ceiling on the maximum,
Well,
not necessarily creating a minimum.
okay. I think he meant that, though. So, did you have to that point also?
Well, yes, on this general point.
Well, do you want to finish your line of questions, then I'll just turn it over to you? Would that be all right?
Okay. Yeah, we can. Sure. Yes, so, Mr. Chairman, sir, so I'm just.
Or maybe not.
So I'm just a bit confused from the way in which you've presented this. You know, certainly we've had, some larger discussion about the efficacy of mandatory minimums, but what is in law today is a mandatory minimum. So we have a minimum 4-year sentence for possession of fentanyl, presumptive 5-year, and a maximum 10-year sentence. So we're not talking about putting into the law for the first time
I have not
a mandatory
seen those.
minimum.
I have not
We're
seen
talking about actually enhancing that sentence. So I'm wondering why, it sounds like your issue is really not with the law. It sounds like your issue is that the prosecutors are not enforcing the current law.
From my understanding, and keeping in mind, I do not claim to be an expert. I am a father of 5 children, a veteran who has buried many soldiers. I know what death does to a family, especially when it's a death that is from the actions of someone else who was breaking the law. In my mind, I was, in everything, all the meetings I've been in, I was not aware that there is a current, and if someone can correct me if I'm wrong, mandatory sentencing for selling fentanyl. And if there is, in all 10 of our papers, I have not seen this happening. So I guess I would say yes, maybe there is a problem with the way prosecutors and judges are handling this, but isn't that just more reason we should be adapting in our laws to say, look, we cannot keep putting up with this. I don't know about you, but I couldn't look at these people behind me and tell the mothers and the fathers and the children, I know someone killed your son with something that he had no idea was coming, but we're just going to let him go. We're going to give him probation. We're going to let him go. I don't see how there's even an argument on this. I can't see how we would not say, let's strengthen the law. Let's strengthen a law that is clearly not working. So to answer your question to the point, yes, I agree with you. There must be some, and I wasn't aware of that. That's a surprise to me. But do the fentanyl dealers know this? And are they seeing prosecutions? If I'm not seeing them, they're not seeing them.
All right, let's do this. Let's move forward, because we got a lot of people want to speak, and I want to get at least everybody get their 2.5 minutes to give their testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all your time.
Very good. Let's see. We have Terry. Is Terry here? Yes. Please. Just state your name for record, and we're going to go for 2.5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Terry Morales, My husband Ray Morales and my daughter Tara are here with me today, one of our grandchildren. Our son Jake was called home to heaven on November 3rd, 2018, due to an accidental fentanyl overdose. Jake was not a drug addict. He was not battling any demon. Jake was a 19-year-old young man figuring out his life and his future. Jake lived at home with us, worked full-time, and was a full-time student at Yavapai College. He already had his classes lined up for the next semester and wanted to learn about real estate investing. We stood in the kitchen the night before he died, joking and laughing sarcastically about how odd it was that he was going to hang out with his best friend Gunnar on a Friday night, that he wanted to come home on Saturday to paint his room. 16 hours later, I received a call from Gunnar's mom that the boys were blue and something was wrong. Jake was a happy, fun-loving, kind person who trusted people and, like most 19-year-old young men, thought he was invincible. Jake expressed many times that he wanted nothing to do with fentanyl and warned other friends to stay away from it. He stopped hanging out with one of his best friends because he was using fentanyl, but was right by his side after he spent a few days in the hospital detoxing. I'm not here seeking revenge or justice for Jake. That ship has sailed. Pant and Prescott Valley PD did everything they could. They followed up on numerous tips that came out of this tragedy, and they arrested multiple dealers. One of them was a person that I believe, and we've been told by others, supplied the counterfeit pills to our son, or our boys that night. Within a month of our son's funeral, he was arrested. Pant had their eyes on him. They watched him, followed him down to Phoenix to pick up the pills, come back, waited till he got to Yavapai County and arrested him. These were the same pills that were on scene when Jake died. Obviously, he had no remorse. He was still dealing them. His brother had the nerve to show up at my son's funeral. He was back out on the streets within a few days of his arrest, receiving only probation. I'm here today hoping that I can influence change in Arizona and prevent this from happening to another family. Federal drug penalties have a minimum of 5 years for possession of fentanyl. And if a death or serious injury incur, that penalty is 20 years. Many states, the last count I was able to find is 20.
Just a couple more seconds, okay? If you could.
Are adopting these same penalties and charges. One of those is California in the Mac Miller case, which is very publicized. Other states that have not adopted these federal penalties will send these cases to the federal level to be sentenced under those penalties. I have a lot of examples, but I'm sure I don't have time for those.
No.
So Arizona is not one of these states. If Arizona does not catch up to the federal penalties and what other states are doing, we are going to be the desired location for these suppliers and dealers.
Thank you very
of
much.
fentanyl.
Does anybody have any questions for the witness?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Thank you. Just briefly, could you explain briefly what those federal penalties involve?
Yes. For fentanyl, Schedule 1, actually for Schedule 1 is 10 to 99 grams of the mixture. First offense is not less than 5 years and not more than 20 or 40 years. If death or serious injury, not less than 20 or more than life. That's the minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I think that, next, please. Thank
I
you.
mean, I hope I'm allotted the same amount of time of the person that was opposed, so I welcome any questions that you may have. Because she spent a lot of time telling us.
We understand. We have a lot of witnesses.
Right.
We're gonna.
But she couldn't take the time to listen to our side. She left.
She did, and I explained
I
that
have
in
to
the
go to
order.
work,
So
but I'm here to listen to both sides.
she would have stayed gladly, but she didn't have that opportunity. I don't think you should take that as a slight against your story. I called her early because I knew she had a scheduling issue. I didn't do that to highlight her view because I'm offering the bill today. So don't take that as a personal offense. Let's see where we land up here.
It is personal. I mean, I understand your point of view, sir, but it is personal to me.
Sure.
It's not just something I'm advocating. This is personal to me, and I don't want any other parent or family to go through that. My grandchildren still ask, why doesn't Uncle Jake come visit us anymore?
Yeah.
They don't understand.
And you have our condolences. I can't describe to you how much we want to see this end.
Well, I would rather him be in prison for 5 years where I can still see him and he can come home than to be dead or to contribute to somebody else's death.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I did have one question.
Sure.
Ma'am, thank you for coming today, and you have our condolences and the loss of your son. It's horrible. Did you have a chance to speak with the prosecutor
No,
in the
they
case?
never called us. Yeah,
I have to get the question out. So
okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to know if you had the chance to speak with the prosecutor who handled the case that you told us about today.
No, we were not informed of any of the hearings or when these were taking place because our son was an adult and they did not consider us victims.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I marked her down as spoke. She spoke. All right.
Mr. Glenn Martin.
So on to Glenn.
Mr. Glenn Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representatives, I appreciate taking the moment that I can talk about my testimony. That was a hard one to follow, I'll tell you, but I've been right there where she is. 7 years ago, I lost my son, 22 years old, in a sober home, having oxycodone being peddled inside the home by a recovering pharmacist. The pharmacist was there, again, recovering. What he got was some more treatment, more time to recover, never had any jail time, but you know, they said that because he's a professional, he's going to have time to be able to recoup himself or rehabilitate himself. That's great, my son's dead. That's the bottom line. If that wasn't bad enough, 2 years ago, my wife's nephew passed away with an overdose of fentanyl. Again, one of these deadly bullets that came out from somebody who walked up, sold him a pill that was supposed to just relax him, killed him that night. So when I think about the penalties for fentanyl, when I think about what is currently happening today in our crisis with the opioid crisis, not to put these people away for a while and make some real penalties for these peddlers. For the peddlers, can you hear me okay?
No, you're out of time. If you could just wrap it up.
Okay, sure, thank you.
I realize it's a short.
We have
an animal bill after
We want
this.
to penalize these people, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
We don't want them on the streets. We don't want to give them. We don't want to give them another chance to go out and hurt another family. You guys have no idea what it's like to be at Christmas time with an empty seat at your table. And it's darn time that we change it and we put some teeth into our legal system. Thank you.
And again, our condolences on your loss.
Thank you, Mr.
And,
Chairman.
and I know that time doesn't heal that wound, but thank you for speaking today. Any questions for the witness? Thank you very much. Who's next? We're going to do all the fours first and then me.
All the fours first. Sherry Rhodes. Thank you. Oh, correction. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is
Is
Sherry
she a
Rhodes.
yes or no? You know what, Sherry, we're going to do all the fours first and then we'll do the against. Are you for the bill? No. Okay, can you just give us 1 minute? I'm sorry.
We're going to get you. I'm sorry.
No, please stick around. We're
Stay
going to
here.
get to you.
Stay here.
Just gonna-
Jill Martin.
Sorry about that, Sherry.
Hi, I'm Jill Martin. I'm Glenn Martin's wife. So you just heard the whole story. There's really not much more that I can say other than that we did have a tragic loss. We lost 2 members to an overdose. And my husband explained what happened in each case. If there's anything that I can quickly say, it's that regarding my nephew, when he received the mimic pill, that he thought it was something else, and he died. This person that gave it to him was a former classmate turned drug dealer. So, about a month before my nephew died, there was another former classmate that died too that got another mimic pill from this former classmate / drug dealer. So, and there's something that my husband did not bring up. In both cases, both my son's and my nephew's case, there was no justice. There was no jail time, no prison time.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes. And so I am for mandatory, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Mandatory minimums. I think people that are selling these drugs need to be held accountable. So with that, I will end it for my 2.5 minutes.
Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
So we have Yavapai County Supervisor Randy Garrison. All right.
Did he
So
say yes, he needed to speak?
it's if necessary.
Okay, we'll go
So
to
we'll
the
go-
to the want to speaks on the no.
All right. So,
Madam, we can start with the young lady.
ma'am, you can come back up. And can you state your name for the record when you come back up? Thank you.
Sorry about that. We're just trying to keep this in some sort of.
It's all right. I'll be
semblance of
short
order.
and sweet. I'm Sherry Rhodes, and I'm a registered nurse. I'm also a third-year doctorate student. I do graduate soon, so I do plan on specializing in addiction medicine. I oppose this bill. I feel that you're pretty much criminalizing people with a healthcare problem. I'm from the East Coast originally, and most of the time the rule is, you don't get high on your own supply. Out here, it's a lot different. Most people that are selling drugs are also using them. That includes fentanyl. There is a physical dependence that goes along with this drug, so that when people don't have it, they get sick, they withdraw. And so it's pretty much a healthcare problem. And so that when you're incarcerating people, giving them mandatory minimums for selling drugs, many of those people are also using drugs. And it's not going to fix the problem. We all know that mandatory minimums don't do anything for recidivism. You're spending money in the criminal justice system, taxpayer money, to house people in jail when that money would be better allocated towards drug rehabilitation programs, restorative justice programs, and also harm reduction programs. And so I feel like if you don't have drug users, you don't really have drug dealers. So I think we really need to be focusing on the problem at hand and getting people to not use drugs or get them clean instead of focusing on locking people up and giving them mandatory minimums for something it's not going to fix the problem. And we all know that. And that's it.
So I have a question for you. Can we do both? Can we go after people selling this very highly dangerous product and provide more treatment for those who are using?
Yes, you can, but I just think it shouldn't be like a hard stop, like mandatory minimums. That it needs to be individualized. Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So I'm also from the East Coast, and so I remember when I was a little younger than you, very few.
How do you remember that?
Well, yeah. We have a running age joke, so that's what this is about. So at that time, we had kind of revolving door of criminal activity, and in the 90s, we moved on a path to being far more difficult on most prosecutions, and that has resulted in a lower crime rate. Now we're saying, look, there are still things that we want to penalize greater so that we don't have to deal with them as often, but we should be doing more on treatment. We should be doing more on rehabilitation. We should be doing more things at the front end of prosecution. You don't think that any one of those elements is inappropriate? In other words, if we can't be tougher on certain crimes if it helps us as a society?
I feel like correlation really isn't causation, and so I don't think we can say that being tougher on crimes and mandatory minimums really contributed to the decrease in crime or the decrease in selling drugs. We just can't say that that's the case, and I don't think that mandatory minimums or increasing the current sentence is going to do anything to deter people from selling drugs. People have been using drugs and selling drugs since the beginning of time, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. What we need to do is try to what the word I lost my the word that I wanted to use, but we need to just try to reduce the harm associated with what's currently going on. But increasing mandatory minimums is not going to reduce people selling drugs, fentanyl, and all that. And also,
And I
most
think
of the
there's
people.
plenty of evidence to the contrary to that.
Well, like I said, I respectfully disagree.
Okay.
And I don't think people that are, and in fact, I know people are not selling drugs with the intention of killing people. They're trying to make a living. Most of these people already have previous crimes and they can't get good jobs. They can't get funding to go back to school. They have collateral consequences. They can't get housing. So they're stuck going to the black market to make a living, to support their families. And so it's a social problem, and we need to fix the social determinants of health. We need to fix all the social problems that contribute to people wanting to sell drugs, and also the adverse childhood experiences, the mental health issues that also contribute to people wanting to use drugs, instead of criminalizing people that are selling drugs pretty much to make a living, and they're not with the intention to kill people or harm people. And that's just the reality of it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, folks turn themselves into criminals.
Say that again?
Folks turn themselves into criminals by an activity that they engage in. But my question for you, and I think you raise an interesting point, what if we were to require, and I don't know, maybe the court does this automatically, but as opposed to a mandatory minimum, mandatory drug use evaluation and treatment. I don't know that that is a mandatory requirement right now.
Okay.
But let's kind of walk through your thesis, your theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I agree with it.
That's okay.
But I do know that there is a certain segment of the selling community that is also a consumer of their own product.
Correct.
If we were to carry that theory out to its logical conclusion, that means all of the dealers who are using their own product would be dead.
Not necessarily.
On fentanyl?
Not necessarily.
I hazard to say that they must really be able to cut a grain of sand down to a very, very small amount.
I don't know.
Mr. Vice Chair, to that point,
Yes.
Mr. Fincham, the analogy that people have been using with a grain of sand, that's a visual.
For real.
But that is not, that is not actually how the bill is. That's not how the drug is ingested.
Okay, please, ma'am. I'm trying to hear what he's saying.
Yeah, I'm just saying, your description of a grain of sand, they're not literally handling grains of sand.
No, but to that
many
point-
many times they're pills. We've heard about pills.
To that point, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the point that I'm making is she's asserting that the people who are selling this garbage are also users. And if that same pill kills one individual, it would also kill the dealer. So I think that there's a fallacy in her argument.
Mr. Fincham, she's the only one.
Please go to the chair.
Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Fincham, to your point, she's the only trained professional who's dealing in this area that we've heard from up to this point. And certainly none of us are. So to describe what she's saying as a fallacy or as an assertion, I think undercuts her credibility. I think actually she has more credibility than any one of us sitting on this dais.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez. It is a simple fact of what I'm going on what she has said. If she is saying that the individuals who sell this oftentimes use the same product, if that pill killed one individual and they took the same pill, doesn't it stand to reason that that same dose would have killed them as well?
If you're
And if
assuming
that is not true, then the argument also fails.
Sir, this is a legal drug.
Please,
this was created by.
please
this
go
was
through the
created,
chair. Gentlemen,
Mr. Vice
gentlemen,
Chair,
please go to the chair.
Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Fincham, fentanyl is not a street drug. It was originally developed by a pharmaceutical company. There are obviously ways in which the drug can be ingested where people don't die. It's happening right now. So the debate that we're getting into now is certainly there are people, and I think this is her point, who are using because they are addicts and they also sell because they are addicts. That is the extent, I think, of her point. I don't believe she's making any other broader statement than that.
To that point,
Well, wait a second. Before we get too far on this, we have some other witnesses. I'm going to be done at 11. So the next bill is going to be like really, really short. Do we want to keep going rounds and rounds on these points that that,
Mr. Chairman, I've more than made my point, I believe. Thank you.
are you okay with where we're at?
I have just
I
one
did have a
point.
question for her, just quickly.
Okay, please.
Ma'am, could you give us a recitation of your personal experience in this area involving drug use and abuse? Not drug use, but drug abuse, treatment and counseling.
Well, I'm a harm reduction advocate. I'm a harm reduction nurse. I used to be homeless. I lived on the streets. I have personal experience with this. Like I said, I am a doctorate student, and so it's not that, if I was thrown in jail or criminalized for some of the things that I've done in the past, I wouldn't be here today. And so I'm an advocate for the underdog. I'm an advocate for all people. And I know people that sell drugs. I know people that use drugs, and they're not bad people. Most of these people are just trying to survive, and they're dealing with the cards that they were dealt. Most of them had adverse childhood experiences. A lot of them have mental health problems, and they're untreated. And so if you don't have drug users, you don't have drug dealers. And so we're not really fixing the problem. You're just criminalizing people that are poor. Most of them are people of color, and they're my people. And I take it very offensive when you're in this white bread world.
Wait, excuse me.
whoa.
Excuse- pardon
I'm
me.
just
Wait,
saying.
excuse me. We will not have that.
Okay, I didn't mean it like in a racial way. I'm just saying
sorry.
like
You
in
did.
a box.
Ma'am,
How else could you take
ma'am, I'm sorry, but thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We won't have people casting aspersions on us. There's plenty of reasons to go after us, but not racial. All right, who do we have?
We have a Karen Williams. Carol Williams.
Thank you for coming. Please just state your name when you start for the record, okay? And you have 2.5 minutes, and then if there's questions.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Carol Williams. I am a Smart Justice organizer for the ACLU of Arizona, but more importantly, I am a formerly incarcerated mother of 3. I've been to prison twice for narcotics. I can tell you that the first time that I went, I came home and quickly relapsed because there's no substance treatment in prison, or if there is, not that I was made aware of. I went back and had to do a mandatory minimum of 4.5 years because it was my second time for the same thing. I'm home now, and I've been sober for over 3 years, and actually 4 almost, but that's of my own doing, not by any treatment that I received in prison. And I also want to clarify that it is not a grain of sand that's 11 grams, it's actually 0.011 grams, just to make everyone aware of the actual fact there.
I thought the math was off on that myself,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because everyone's saying it. And so anyways, I oppose this bill because making someone who is, I did a lot of time, and I did sell pills and I did sell narcotics, but it was to support my own habit. I never did it to hurt anybody. And the majority of people that I know that are in prison for substances are the same as me. We have an addiction and we need help and we need treatment.
Time's up. But, I mean, you can finish your sentence. I don't.
That's good.
Any questions for the witness? Thank you, and brave of you to come. Thank you.
Okay, let's see it. Michelle Meinholm. I probably tore that last name up.
Is Michelle here?
Michelle, are you here? All right, moving on. Boaz. There he is.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Boaz Whitbeck. I'm the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Arizona chapter. I'll try to keep this brief. A lot of the points I was going to make have been made, so I'll just cover the ones that haven't. We believe that we should have smart on crime, soft on taxpayer reforms that make our communities safer and improve lives. Unfortunately, we believe this bill accomplishes none of these goals. It's contrary to the progress that was made in the federal First Step Act, which was signed by President Trump and reduces mandatory minimums for drug offenses. And as was stated earlier, all the evidence and statistics on what is effective in drug sentencing says that longer drug sentences have no correlation to actually solving drug problems. There's no evidence to that. Alternative programs have shown that there are actual ways you can solve this. For example, Texas has virtually no mandatory sentencing for any drug crime and showed that investment in drug treatment and diversion can reduce prison population and still see significant drops in crime. And we also need diversion options, judicial discretion, drug courts. Those have shown that they actually reduce recidivism.
Okay. If you could just wrap it up, because your 2.5 minutes is up, so if you just...
Okay.
No.
Thank you. Yeah, that's...
So I have a question. So
Sure.
Someone's selling something laced with fentanyl. They made it themselves. They have no drug problem. How does treatment change that dynamic?
Great question, Mr. Chair. We would say that, so this bill covers more than that. I'd say for that, there's probably a need for punishment for somebody who's manufacturing and that sort of thing. So what we're concerned about is the breadth of the extent of the bill.
But specifically to my question, how does treatment affect someone who's just in this for the profit motive, does not have a drug problem?
Mr. Chair, I believe I answered that. It wouldn't affect somebody who's not an addict. Correct.
So your statement was that, we can treat these issues through, you said two things, intervention and then treatment.
Mm-hmm.
How do you intervene with someone who's just in this for the profit margin?
Mr. Chairman, I believe I already answered that question.
So you'd be for the bill when it comes down to people who are just in this as a business?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's what I'm saying. That this is a broader bill that covers a lot of addicts who are reselling their fix, and there's no threshold, no quantity and amount as previous.
Okay.
Has said.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to that point, when you're delineating folks that have an addiction issue from folks that sell with intent to sell,
I actually had no problem, except for I wanted to demonstrate that he was using a broad definition that didn't fit all circumstances.
well, I was just correcting that because currently ARS 133401, subsection 20, A through quadruple N, has 14 listings for fentanyl, carfentanil, all the different iterations of it. So the drug is already listed in Arizona statutes as a narcotic,
Certainly.
for which we have mandatory minimums for punishment. So I think the question that you're asking this gentleman is already laid out in our current statutes as far as who should be punished and for what and what the intent is.
Well, I'm speaking in light of this bill, and I do believe that raising the mandatory minimums would be a benefit in this activity. And that I was just seeing if his carte blanche statement was covering all things, and which then he said, well, it didn't. So I'm just trying to sort that out. Representative Engel.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Boas, thank you very much for being here. And since you've studied this area and specifically told us a bit about Texas as an alternative model, could you tell us a bit more about that? You said that they did something different. They saw a decrease in crime. Can you explain that further? Was it a decrease in drug crime?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Engel, I don't have that specific fact of whether it was a decrease in drug crime. I know violent and nonviolent crimes dropped, so I'm assuming that's included in that, but I don't have the specific details on what was going on. But yes, that you did see less recidivism of people with drug crimes.
Mr. Chair.
Did you have a question?
Mr. Boas, thank you, or Boas, thanks for coming out here. And my question is, I want to focus around the user,
yeah,
the person who possesses the drug. Would you agree that if the language was tightened up, we remove the possessor, because that's the person that's being affected by it, that this bill has a chance to do what it's intended to do.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Blackman, so this bill does not include the possession mere alone. So what the concern of Americans for Prosperity and others is that many heroin addicts, those who may have lacings of fentanyl in them, are also selling small portions. And so it does affect the user because many of them are also addicts.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, but we really got to move along.
let's move along, Mr. Chair.
That's what he was gonna say anyhow.
We're going to go 5 more minutes, so if we could get, who else is?
We have
Name
Carolyn,
everybody who needs to speak.
Carolyn Isaacson,
We have Carolyn, we have
Janice Hanks.
Janice Hanks,
Please come up to the podium, ma'am.
Nathan, Nicholas, and Christopher. Is that all?
Yes, that's it.
Oh, no, then we
No.
have. So if we could get people kind of line up and get ready to go, and we're gonna move through this, okay? And I appreciate your coming and what you want to say, but we have a schedule and we're gonna try to keep to it. So, please,
Okay.
and 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you for hearing my thoughts on HB 2036. My name is Janice Hanks. I'm a registered voter in District 15.
Very
I
good.
oppose HB 2036. I have seen both sides of the opioid crisis. I've had a loved one convicted and sent to prison because of property offenses which he committed to fund his substance use disorder. And I've also had a loved one who passed away of an opioid fentanyl overdose. In both cases, that loved one was my son Jonathan. And yet I'm here today to oppose HB 2036 and urge this committee to reject it. Jonathan began using drugs in his late teens. He quickly became addicted to opioids. It seemed like overnight this nightmare hit the entire neighborhood. His need drove him to steal change from a console of a car. He was caught and convicted to 3.5 years in prison. Of course, I realized he had to be held accountable, but I thought he could get some type of assistance while in prison. His attorney requested he be placed in the Alpha program 3 times during the course of his court hearings, but the prosecutor denied all 3 requests. The judge had no authority in her own courtroom because of mandatory minimums. Because there are only enough drug treatment programs to serve 3% of Arizona's 42,000 person prison population.
If you could wrap it up, thank you.
Jonathan was not able to get into any type of program while in prison, but he did manage to get sober on his own and was sober when he came home. It was so nice to have him back home. He was back to his old self again. Even though I heard stories of not allowing your loved one to return back home, he seemed to be doing great. So I stopped pushing him to move away.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. Can you sum it up in 1 sentence? I don't want to be rude to you, but we're trying to keep on a timeline here.
He was walking home from work one night and ran into a friend in the neighborhood. He got the pill from the friend in the neighborhood, and that friend was a drug substance abuse disorder too. And I would hate to see that boy go to prison for giving my son a fentanyl pill. He probably didn't even know it would, well, I know he didn't know it would kill him. So I'm just saying there needs to be some discretion in the judge's courtroom of the people convicted. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a punishment. I'm just saying there needs to be some discretion.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You know, nothing we can do here can make that easier.
Oh, I
So
know.
I apologize that, we tight on time. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Next, please state your name at the podium. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, representatives. My name is Joel Feynman. I'm the head of the Pima County Public Defender's Office. And I actually think I have an answer to the question that a lot of you have been asking, which is this bill going to be effective? It will only be effective if it punishes and imprisons people who are manufacturing and distributing fentanyl. My office did an exhaustive study in 2016. We looked at every single drug case that we had in Pima County. 50% of all drug cases, it's a statistically significant sample. What we found is that 3 out of the 4 people charged with drug sales should have been charged with drug possession. We looked at the statutory aggravators and mitigators in state law, and we realized that a lot of the people, 75% of the people who were charged as drug salesmen, were small-time users selling drugs to support their habit. And they did not have all of the statutory aggravators that you would expect to find, such as prior convictions. Representative Fincham, we found that 59% of those people were first-time offenders.
That's helpful.
Representative Roberts, we found that of those 3/4 of people, almost none were manufacturing fentanyl. So I think that we're all wanting sort of the same thing, which is to get fentanyl out of our communities and punish the people who are actually bringing it into our communities. But without requiring mandatory minimum amounts, without requiring more indicia of actual sales,
just finish up.
this bill does not target those people. It is a very broad weapon, and we need a very sharp scalpel.
All right, quickly.
Counselor, did anyone, and I hate your voice, too perfect.
You'll have to take that up with my father, Representative Lawrence.
Too perfect.
He means jealous.
I am
jealous.
It's a radio voice.
Right.
Yeah.
On the people that were arrested, did you question them about where they obtained the drug? And was there any attempt made to go after those people?
You'll have to talk to the prosecutors about that, Representative Lawrence. As defense attorneys, we don't investigate where the drugs come from. I can tell you that of all of the cases we get in my office, which is different from the federal system, we do not get cases of people importing drugs from other countries, especially Mexico. We just don't represent those people. Those people are not going to be the ones captured by this law.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Please. Just state your name for the record.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and representatives. Thank you. My name is Nate Wade. I am a public defender in Pima County, and I work a lot on legislative and policy issues in our office. I did want to point out that this is not just fentanyl we're talking about, it's also heroin. I've done over 1,000, if not 2,000 drug cases. I've never had a manufacturing case. I've only had one case that involved what I would call a big-time drug dealer or even a medium-level drug dealer. What I get are users who are selling to support their own habits, and they are terrified to give up their dealers, by the way. I want to share with you a quick story about one of my clients who would be captured under this bill, and hopefully at the end you'll understand why. I have her permission to share this story. Her name is Molly. Molly was training to be an Olympic swimmer. Everything we would consider to be an all-American girl. Since about 5 years old, 8 hours in the pool every day. She competed internationally, she won awards, and while she was doing her Olympic training, she got a scholarship to a university in the Midwest. While she was a freshman in college, she went to a party. She was roofied, and she was gang raped by 3 members of the football team at that college. The university then tried to cover up the offense.
Excuse me. We can't hear the witness. Sorry.
And I may go a little long, so I hope for a little.
Do you have a to that point or a motion? You know,
Just
point. Thank you.
to your point, we
will try to be quiet.
We can actually hear your point.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this counting against my time? I hope not.
No, man, you're good.
Please remove him from the building.
So Molly was raped. She dropped out of college. She moved back to Tucson with her family. She fell in with some people who were addicted to heroin and became a heroin addict. Her first offense was pawning something that her boyfriend, who was a heroin dealer, stole. So Molly was on probation. Molly went to therapy, and as often happens, she relapsed. Molly, who just 2 years earlier was swimming competitively at a university in Iowa, was now prostituting herself at a Circle K in Tucson one night. An undercover officer picked her up. They negotiated a deal. All of it is recorded. During the negotiation, the undercover officer asked her if she had something to help. Molly agreed to sell him her last dime bag of heroin, and in fact, for $10, by the way, and in fact told him
Can we
I'm in
Thank
a.
you.
and
I've
this is
added
really
some time
important.
because of my
Thank you.
interruptions.
Told him she was glad that he was buying it because she didn't want to do it anymore and she would have taken it home and done it. Under this bill, Molly would be going to prison for 5 years for selling a dime bag of heroin. Under this bill, Molly would probably not get any treatment at all, and Molly would come out more addicted to drugs and probably sell again. Instead, we were able to get Molly into a residential treatment program. Instead, Molly not only finished that residential treatment program, she became a drug counselor for young women. This bill will throw away people like Molly who are making a difference in the community. And I also want to note, we were lucky to have a fantastic prosecutor in this case who did use discretion. Unfortunately, we had to hammer out the deal in secret because it went against her company policy.
At this point, you're way over in your time. So if somebody wants to ask you a question or something, I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
Mr.
Do you have a
Chairman,
question?
yes. Mr. Wade, can you describe how the prosecutor used his or her discretion to make a better sentence for this individual?
Yes, Representative. Initially, because she had a prior, she would have been prison only. The prosecutor gave her a chance on probation requiring residential treatment. When Molly was discharged successfully from probation, that prosecutor sent flowers. That prosecutor was responsible for letting a person get help and to help other people. This bill would take away that discretion.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Please state your name for the record, please.
Good morning. My
2
name is
minute
Alyssa
minutes.
Johnson. I'm the Arizona State Director for Forward.us, a bipartisan advocacy organization started by leaders of the technology and business community. Arizona is in an incarceration crisis, and House Bill 2036 will only make that crisis worse. Presumptive sentences for the sale and transfer of heroin and fentanyl will not reduce the state's drug problem. In Arizona, in 2011, a very similar bill was passed regarding methamphetamine. And between 2011 to more recently, based on national surveys, the rate of drug use in the state of Arizona has not changed. Long sentences do not reduce the supply of drugs or the number of people addicted to them, as we have heard this morning. The focus should be treatment. At Forward.us, we have the capacity to run fiscal impacts on policies that will shrink or increase prison populations. According to our estimates, this bill would increase the prison population by at least 630 people. And at a cost of $68 per day, this would cost the state about $15.7 million a year. And as we know, people who are incarcerated in Arizona's prisons have a significant problem accessing treatment. And so a population that is very much in need of treatment it would be even more difficult for them to access it. This bill will not reduce heroin and fentanyl in the state, but it will come at a great expense to the state. I urge you to vote against this bill and instead turn to research-proven responses to addiction.
Wow, within 2 seconds.
Mr.
That was just
Chairman.
impressive.
May I ask a question that came up earlier and I really wanted to ask? Is there a racial aspect to those using the fentanyl?
Chair and Representative Lawrence, I do not have specific data with me regarding the racial use of fentanyl in the state of Arizona. I would be happy to look into that data and get back to you.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please state your name for the record. You have 2.5 minutes.
Christopher Averett, Mr. Chair, Representatives. I am a subject matter expert on the opioid epidemic. I've served as a consultant for the CDC. I started a nonprofit that's distributed over 40,000 doses of naloxone. We saved 4,000 people's lives in it. I have worked diligently to try to help our community. Yesterday I spent the day with 30 people, experts from around Arizona and from around the nation, talking about the opioid crisis. In 9 hours, not one time did they mention we needed harsher criminal penalties. In fact, CDC doesn't recommend that. There's no major public health that recommends that. The only people that recommend that are prosecutors. I'm here more personally, though, because all of the work I just mentioned and the community impact I've had would be nothing if there was such a bill as HB 2036. I was arrested for dealing heroin, 3 counts of dealing heroin. I would be sitting in jail right now, costing taxpayers money, rotting away. I would not be able to contribute at all. What happened in my dealing was we all chipped in 20 bucks a piece. I went over with $60. I bought it. I took it back to my friends. That's it. Right? I took money and I delivered the drug. So that would have been at least 5 years a prison sentence for me. Luckily, my prosecutor had discretion. We have bipartisan agreement that we don't need any more incarceration. This cost the state of Kentucky $600 million when they increased penalization about 3 years ago. They now went from 5% decrease in prison population to moving back towards private prisons because they can't handle the 20% increase they've had since similar legislation. We also know that there's no evidence, and I would wager if it's not illegal money, there is no peer-reviewed evidence to show this kind of legislation would have any effect on the opioid crisis and the minimization of fentanyl distribution.
Your time's up. Do you have a closing sentence you would like to make?
That's good. Reject House Bill 2036.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts, we're gonna move right along as soon as
Okay.
you're done with your question. So.
Mr. Chairman, sir, you said you're a subject matter expert, so in your opinion and all of those individuals that you met with yesterday and so on and so forth, would you agree or be able to support this bill if we tailored it to focus on manufacturing and possibly distribution?
So there is no distinction between drug dealing and drug using. 80% of they did a study on this, 80% of the people in jail in New York for drug dealing tested positive for the drugs that they were dealing. So again, because we can't distinguish, what ends up is we have old, antiquated war on drugs ideas that are actually a war on people who use drugs. So I would not support that in the sense that distributors could be people like me who were just chipping in 20 bucks to get their friends some dope and save some gas money.
If I may, Mr. Chair, remove distribution and just consider manufacture.
I think we all want to get kingpins who are manufacturing and putting poison into our communities, absolutely. I don't agree with mandatory minimums because there's no efficacy to them. As a nonprofit owner, I have to demonstrate efficacy for all my programs. Legislators and prosecutors, I believe, should be held to the same standard. So show me the peer-reviewed evidence, and I would back it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna move this bill and vote.
Mr. Chair, I move that HB 2036, correction. On the wrong page.
Be given the due pass recommendation.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mr. Chair, I move that HB 2036 be returned with a due pass recommendation.
You've heard the motion. The secretary will call the roll.
Representative Bartow?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
there's been some excellent testimony today, very moving. I think we really, if we are going to move forward with this bill and not have the results that maybe other states have had in being an overreaching type of response to this crisis, we have to do something in terms of making it much more narrow, using the scalpel to address maybe pure drug selling of fentanyl not mixed with other drugs or something similar to that, or determine amounts, which is difficult with a drug like fentanyl. It's killing people. I think it bears a very longer discussion than this hearing alone, and that's why I'm going to vote yes for now, but I will not be a yes on the floor with the bill in this shape. So thank you for bringing the bill. Thank you, everybody, for coming and giving us such great information. I think we all want to solve the problem and we want to do it right. I vote aye.
Representative DeGrazia?
Pass.
Representative Engel?
Pass.
Representative Fincham?
Mr. Chairman, may I explain my vote?
Please do.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I have a certain amount of trepidation. I mean, we've heard some really good testimony. Some of it is believable. Some of it I have some serious questions about. I do believe that there is a bit of a fallacy gremlin running around inside of this. I'm going to be a conditional yes. I've spoken to the bill sponsor before the hearing, just in asking some general questions about, if we were to exclude first offense, if we were to give the prosecutors some additional tools, because I do think there is a certain amount of validity to an individual getting caught for the very first time. I also recognize the opportunity for a prosecutor to use leverage so that we can work the up chain. This is a distribution chain. This is a supply chain issue. And when someone is faced with the opportunity to identify their supplier, I think that's a valid use of the law. I don't want to strip prosecutors of the opportunity to extend that. At the same time, I think there is a certain amount of validity to, the first time, okay, you can claim ignorance. But if we have some additional safeguards in there, so for example, a requirement for drug an evaluation for drug use as opposed to a mandatory minimum for first offense, those are the kind of things that I'd like to work with the sponsor on. I think there is a pathway to passage of mandatory minimums for the most serious people. I'd also like to see a removal of the maximum. So with that, I'm a yes for now. That's not a guaranteed yes if we can't come to an acceptable conclusion before we go to Cal.
Representative Lawrence.
Comment, sir.
Please.
We've heard testimony. Some of it I felt was over-the-top testimony, goody two-shoe, over-the-top testimony. This is a serious matter. There are people dying, being handed fentanyl, and others say, well, they're handing fentanyl because they're a user. They've got to do something with their lives. Don't you understand? They've got to make a living. That's not a living. That's not the way to make a living. I'm going to vote aye. I'm going to hope that the prosecutors will find a way to say, and this is giving a little leeway to the aye vote. I want the prosecutor to do everything that he or she can to find the up chain, find out from whence cometh the drug. With that, I'll vote aye, Chairman.
Representative Pollock.
Pass.
Representative Roberts.
Mr. Chairman, may I explain my vote?
Please.
So, I've taken an attack on this bill from the beginning, and I stated very early on that there are specific issues that I have. I think that there may be a narrow possibility that we could do something with this bill. I think we all agree it's a very important issue. The issue is, is a resounding, it needs to be worked on. However, as I stated before, I have an issue with continuing to go down the path of putting substance abuse users in prison, and so we have to do something and narrow the scope on this bill to possibly just limiting manufacture. If there's a way that we can address distribution, I'm not sure where that is, if we have to look at an amount, if we have to separate heroin from fentanyl because of the minuscule quantities, there's a lot to be looked at. I'm going to be a conditional yes today, and hopefully there's a lot of work that can be done. I would like to ask that some of the testimony, specifically the Pima public defender that spoke earlier, and anyone that's in the community, I want your input on this because I think it's an important issue. If there's anything that we can do, because there's statistics out there that other states have taken a very hard line tack on this, and it's utterly failed. The state of Florida did this in 2017, and they haven't seen any positive results. So I'm going to be a conditional yes, but it's very conditional. Thank you.
Representative Rodriguez.
Pass.
Representative Blackburn.
Yes. Mr. Chair, permission to explain my vote?
Please.
So, community safety is important to me, also making sure that our victims are taken care of. We have an epidemic in our prison systems now that not only involves the user that's being sentenced to prison, but also the lack of resources from substance abuse counselors that are in prison. 90% of the folks that are in our prison system now that have used this drug are there because of that. And I'm excluding the other drugs. It's 90%. With the shortage of substance abuse counselors in there, those folks that are presently incarcerated are not getting the treatment that they need. So as a result of that, they go through the criminal justice system and then they exit, and upon exiting, they still have the problem. I do not think that this bill addresses the problem of substance abuse. I believe that this bill is too wide and it needs to be narrowed. In order for us to fix our criminal justice system in Arizona, we have to take responsible steps to ensure that both are met. Taking care of the community and ensuring that the person who commits the crime is the right person that should be in prison. We also have a third aspect of that. Those folks that use this particular drug. Now, it's important to me that we focus on the latter when they are occupying the majority space in our prison system, because they will get out and they will still have a problem. I would like to see this bill held. However, there is an opportunity to work this bill in an amendment. Therefore, I am voting yes for this bill on a contingent that I am able to work an amendment on this bill using all resources available to narrow the scope of this. If we are not able to do that, on the floor, I will vote no. So, as to now, my vote is yes, for the record, and we will work on this bill, Mr. Chair.
Representative DeGrazia.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I explain? To everyone who came in, who has suffered loss, and everyone who's watching at home that suffered, you do have our condolences. This is a tremendously devastating topic that we are taking up today, and one that I will assure you that none of us up here take lightly, and we are all working diligently to find the best solution possible. And keeping that in mind, we have statutes on the Arizona books that classify fentanyl as a narcotic, and sale of fentanyl can be classed as a felony, class 2 felony, which would carry between a 4-year sentence and a 10-year sentence. So we have on the Arizona books laws that address this. The real question that we're getting to, the real heart of this, is how do we address the issue of the people in our community, our friends, our neighbors, some of our loved ones that have addiction issues that need treatment. This bill does not have a discriminator that would allow distinction between the folks that are suffering through an addiction, that are possessing because they're also using. This bill will scoop them up and will put them in a scenario where it is likely to do more harm than good. We have 2 states already that have passed similar bills, and we know that both of those states have failed with a similar bill, and one of them, by testimony today, has expended $600 million on that failed attempt. We are not going to spend $600 million on a failed attempt. We're going to get our folks the treatment they need. We're going to get them back into their families, back into their homes, back to being productive parts of our community. For that reason, I vote no.
Representative Engel.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, could I make a substitute motion that we hold this bill for further study?
No, we are in explaining the vote. You should have done that when we made the motion to move forward.
Okay, so it's no longer allowed after we've started to vote?
I don't think so, but I'd have to check with the rules attorneys. I have the votes to move this forward. Do you want me to call the rules attorney and have him come down and go through I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but if I'm not, you can have your motion. But
Okay, I'll withdraw the motion.
thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to explain your vote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to explain my
Thank you
vote.
because we do have a lot of people want to speak to the next bill also, and I really will not be able to hear that testimony if we don't move along.
Okay, granted. I think we've had very good testimony this morning. I really appreciate all the people who have taken the time to come here and driven long distances. What we've heard is that this bill is manifestly overbroad, and we've also heard that it is a continuation of Arizona's failed policies with respect to criminal drug sentencing. It sweeps within its grasp drug addicts. It's not a finely tuned scalpel to focus in on the real perpetrators of the crimes we're trying to address, which are the dealers with intent to addict others. Instead, we are prosecuting the addicted. Both sides of the aisle are here today and have told us that same story. And I think that's quite remarkable. I understand that it seems like there is an interest in amending this bill, and that's good, but all the proposals I'm hearing is basically to start from scratch. This bill is not about manufacturer distribution. I support my colleagues in wanting to focus on that. That is something we have not focused on, but we need to. Minimum thresholds, that would be a great idea. The intent standard, great idea. But we don't have anything here in front of us on that. And I think the whole purpose of a committee is that we debate these issues. We look at a proposal, we get testimony on it. And I am simply not comfortable with voting this through and having folks, catch each other in the hall and come up with some amendment that then comes to the floor. The job of our Judiciary Committee is to debate policy. This is a very big step in enhancing the current mandatory minimum sentence we have for these narcotic drugs. And I think it's the duty of the members of this committee to debate that and have evidence on any new bill that we're going to put together. And with that, I'm a no.
Representative Pollock.
Mr. Chair, I'll be very brief. I support the comments that my colleagues have made, and I'll also be a no.
Representative Rodriguez.
Mr. Chair, may I explain my vote, please? Thank you. We start in the criminal justice system with the intent of achieving individualized justice, and individualized in terms of, are we accounting for what the defendant has done? Are we accounting for what has happened to the victim if there is one? Are we accounting for promoting respect for the law, getting the person treatment that they may need or education, doing things that fashions a fair and just punishment? This bill in its current form will not lead to individualized justice, and in many cases will lead to an unjust punishment. The testimony that we've heard today by some has been described as goody two-shoes. I don't think that's a productive way of describing it. That's someone's life. At the end of the day, we're dealing with individuals. We are dealing with a law, but it is applied in the real world, and it affects families, it affects individuals, both those of the drug addicted and those who in their family who struggle with these issues. Right now, in our Department of Corrections, there are over 5,000 people who are serving sentences for meth possession. That's costing our state $130 million a year. That is a significant amount. And now with this bill in its current form, we will create another class of individuals who are drug addicted and who are not receiving treatment and who are being punished and who have been punished without a concern for individualized justice. This bill is also strange for some reason. I can't understand how this bill goes from these individuals are not being prosecuted in a way that I feel comfortable with, or that many of the witnesses said that they were resentful because they felt like what happened to their family wasn't taken into consideration by the individual prosecutorial agencies where they live. That's a separate issue from whether or not we should be making a choice this broad that lumps heroin users and the heroin addicted with fentanyl users and the fentanyl addicted, and also the dealers who are preying upon them. And so it begs the question to me, why are we looking to remove more judicial discretion when the issue here may very well be with each individual prosecutorial agency perhaps needing to be more transparent in how they explain their prosecutorial decisions to their citizens. Mr. Fincham brought up a very interesting question where he was asking, is the failure with the judges or is the failure with the prosecutors? Quite frankly, I don't think we know that today, sir. And we're being asked to make a significant change in our state's policy without data to support it. And on the contrary, we've heard data that shows we should be doing the exact opposite, or at the very least not adopting this. We do have hard numbers showing that. Mr. Feynman presented that. Numerous witnesses talked about the correlation between more effective treatment and counseling and lowering crime rates. That we have data for. And so with that, this bill is not a direction we should be heading in. It is a significant step backwards. It points out a very significant issue that I think every member on this dais would work on, and that's the distribution and the manufacturing of fentanyl. But this bill doesn't do that. For that reason, I'm a no.
Representative Allen.
Well, I just first of all want to thank the witnesses. There was a lot of passions on both sides of this issue, and for the most part, you all handled yourself very well, and to help us to understand the facts of this bill, and I appreciate that. This bill does need some work before it goes to Cal. I assure that it will be done, and with that, I'm an aye. Next bill will be HB 2062. So if you start heading to the podium. Members, by your vote of, where are we? 6 ayes, 4 nays, 0 absent, 0 present, you have given House Bill 2036 a due pass recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the people that came to testify. This does need work on it. There will be amendments made and presented, and we will consider everyone's input. It's a difficult topic we've been trying to work with things like this for a number of years, so hopefully we can get something done. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Please. If we get a little quiet in here, please, we're going to start the next bill. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Pierce, could you? Thank you. We don't want to upset another former senator. Let's keep going.
Mr. Chairman and members, for the record, Isabella Russian, Assistant Research Analyst for the Judiciary Committee. HB 2062 bans a person from knowingly owning, possessing, purchasing, selling, transferring, or manufacturing animal fighting paraphernalia for the purposes of engaging in, promoting, or facilitating animal fighting or cockfighting. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Any questions for staff?
I have one.
Go ahead.
How are you enjoying your new job?
It's really good, thank you. Mr. Chair, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, don't fall into his traps. Representative England.
I do have a question. Mr. Chairman, and it's Isabel, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Ms. Engel, yes, ma'am.
Yes. Would you be able to tell us, my understanding is that agricultural entities are exempt from this law as well as other laws dealing with animal cruelty. Is that correct? Can you confirm that?
The sponsor's here. I think he's going to be able to shed some light on this. And then we have people from both the ag community who, one of them's opposed to this bill, might be able to explain why that is, if that would be helpful. It's our first day on the job, man. Did you have an answer, or do you want me to move forward?
I can answer, Mr. Chair, I can
Sure.
answer the question.
Sorry about that. I was trying to create cover.
Mr. Chair, Representative Engel, this bill references 1329-1001 related to animal fighting classifications. In that statute, it specifies that the section does not prohibit or restrict activities permitted by or pursuant to Title III. Title III references agriculture.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kavanaugh?
Yes.
You have 8 seconds. Use them where you want.
8 seconds? Now it's only 4. 2, thanks. Thank you. Representative John Kavanaugh, sponsor of the bill, which I'm running on behalf of the Humane Society of the United States. With reference to agriculture, only legal agricultural practices are exempt from this. But if a farmer or something was running a cockfight or something like that, they would be guilty under this. The idea is not to get certain activities that might be construed as either this or agriculture, especially related to the drugs. And I think somebody from ag is going to talk to you a little bit later about that, and we're going to work on that. We don't want to get them caught up in accusations that aren't totally, justified. But if it's the actual animal fighting or cockfighting, they would in fact be. If they were running that on their property, they would be. But if it's something that has to do with for the same reason that like a cattle rancher can slaughter a cow, which would normally be extreme cruelty, but it's part of their business. So it's a blurry line that we try to walk between for animal safety and the industry. Okay, so animal fighting, of course, is in and of itself bad. It's extremely cruel to the animals, and personally, I think it also degrades the people who are involved, either as operators or who are watching in it. And animal fighting is actually worse when it is enhanced with these types of paraphernalia. These types of paraphernalia are used to build up the endurance in the animal, so the blood sport goes on longer. They're sometimes used to mask the pain of the animal, so they fight through the pain to the very end in their death. And it also is used to enhance the bloodletting, especially the paraphernalia like razors and spikes that are placed on the legs so that as they bite, they rip each other apart. So it's pretty horrible stuff. This bill deters animal fighting and cockfighting by 2 ways. First, it removes the paraphernalia, which facilitates the entire operation. And second, it gives law enforcement the ability to take action when they are not able to be there when the actual fighting occurs. If law enforcement is there when the fighting occurs, they can be arrested for the felony level animal fighting. But if they're not, then they can't. So what happens then would be if law enforcement got there before on a tip or something and they saw this paraphernalia, they could at least take action under this law. Likewise, if they came after and the fighting was over, they could still charge the paraphernalia if it was present. And by the way, this bill is true to the criminal justice principle of proportionality. The actual fighting, they're all felonies, 6 and 5 felonies, animal fighting. Paraphernalia possession, because it's not as extreme as fighting, is a misdemeanor. So there's proportionality involved in here too. The legislature has a long bipartisan history of supporting the anti-animal fighting and animal cruelty legislation. And law enforcement also supports this bill. And I would also say that the ag industry also has a long history of opposing this type of brutal behavior. So I think there hopefully will be a consensus among everyone. There is a small tweak that we're speaking to ag about, and somebody will talk to that later, and we're perfectly receptive to making that work. And with that, I will abandon my usual MO and shut up.
Thank you.
Mark of the day.
Who would you like to speak to this first? So we
The Humane Society?
okay. And 2.5 minutes, please.
Hi, good morning, Chairman Allen, members of the committee. I am Kelly Pinkleton, the Arizona Senior State Director with the Humane Society of the United States. We have provided training on animal cruelty and animal fighting investigations to over 500 law enforcement officers, animal control, and prosecutors in Arizona. One of the things we have heard time and time again from experts in the field is that if our state, like 25 other states, covered some type of law for animal fighting paraphernalia, this would help them combat animal fighting in general. As Representative Kavanaugh said, the sponsor that HB 2062 does provide additional tools for law enforcement. You'll be hearing from the Arizona Police Association shortly in their support of that. Animal fighting is an extreme example of animal cruelty. Dog fighting and cockfighting it glamorizes violence, turns it into entertainment, often with tens of thousands of dollars on the line. Animals used in these events, as the representative said, it really is pretty horrible. They can die of blood loss, shock, dehydration, just extreme death, often in hours, days. Organized animal fighting is often associated with other criminal activities such as illegal gambling, illegal drug trafficking, and firearm trade. It is premeditated and a cruel practice. This bill would prohibit the possession, manufacture, sale of animal fighting equipment and implements such as cat mills used for endurance training, breaking sticks to pry apart the teeth of dogs, and Jenny mills or cat mills. And I provided everybody this morning with a fact sheet. Hopefully you got that. There are photos in there of some of this. A few of these items I do want to point out may be used for legal or legitimate things, although if you'll notice on the photo in the fact sheet I sent that a cat mill or Jenny mill or even a treadmill is different than the treadmill you may have in your home that you worked out to this morning. The language of the bill does specifically mandate that possession, manufacture, purchase, or sale of animal fighting paraphernalia is only legal when the purpose of these items is to engage in, promote, or facilitate animal fighting. Animal fighting rings are difficult to prosecute. Law enforcement often is unable to catch animal fighters in the act because of the complexity of their operations. 25 states, as I mentioned, have taken steps to make the possession of animal fighting paraphernalia illegal, and I'm hoping that Arizona will join those 25 states. I'll be brief. I'll be happy to take any questions, but if I may, Mr. Chairman, I did want to address what Representative Engel asked about statute.
Well, the ag people are here. Maybe
Okay.
hear from them.
Okay, all right. Patrick's going to speak. That's fine. Are there any questions members have for me?
To that point, Mr. Chairman, if Ms. Pinkleton can
quickly
respond, that would be, I would appreciate it.
I'm about to call the question myself.
Sure. As Representative or the staff member mentioned, that there is in Title 13, the cruelty statutes, there is an exemption for Title III activities. But specifically in statute, under dogfighting and cockfighting, whether it's the actual act of or a person, a spectator, which is illegal in Arizona to be at these events, there are some specified exemptions for that, such as activity involving, these are exempt activities, activity involving the possession, training, exhibition, or use of an animal in the otherwise lawful pursuits of hunting, ranching, farming, rodeos, shows, and security services are exempt from the provisions. Any other questions, Mr. Chairman or members?
Thank you very much.
Thanks to the sponsor, and thank you for hearing this bill today.
Let's hear from the ag community next, if that's okay. Patrick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Patrick Bray. I represent the Arizona Farm and Ranch Group. Appreciate you listening to me today. There are some exemptions under Title 13, as you brought up, but a lot of it is stated that does not prohibit us from doing something. When you get into this particular new statute, again, have no problem with outlawing those things that are truly violent and truly fighting paraphernalia. We understand that, have no problem with it. It's really, if you look at the bill, after you kind of get into Section C, there's a little bit of vagueness, specifically when you get into unprescribed veterinary medicine, treatment supplies. Those are that's the area that kind of starts to concern us, because if you've been in and around any operation, I can tell you, personally, cattle I run, I have a whole fridge at home that's full of some sort of medical supply that is not necessarily prescribed by a veterinarian, and other supplies to take care of animals and wounds and that kind of stuff. So I talked with both the sponsor and HSUS. I don't see why we can't come to some sort of agreement, get to what they need to get at, just ensure that we are not overstepping or kind of creating more gray areas of law. And so with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
And sponsor, you said you're gonna work this difference out, or you?
Yeah, I have a big bottle of Vague out in my office.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and sir, I have actually had, some of us actually had sort of some similar concerns about some of the things in that definition, but it was pointed out to me very helpfully that definition is found, has to be read within the other language, that it has to be for a purpose of engaging in promoting or facilitating animal fighting pursuant to section 132910. So it's not like this bill outlaws the use of unprescribed veterinary medicine. It's only in the context of, for the purpose of engaging or promoting and facilitating animal fighting. So does that help you? It certainly did me.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Engel, I see what you're saying. I guess I get a little bit more skeptical in there. I know it says knowing and possess, and when you start working in and around these larger operations where you may have employees that have access to stuff, I think there's a number of ways that it can go. And so I feel confident that between us and the stakeholders that we can work out language that we both feel comfortable moving this forward. They get what they need. We have reassurances that we don't get caught up in unintended consequences, because even with the exemptions we have today, I can tell you I've personally been involved and called as an expert witness because prosecutors felt that the exemption didn't cover us. So I just want, try and make it as black and white as possible for everyone to understand. Get the true bad guys, solve the problem, let us do our job.
So we have two people from the law enforcement end of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we just get from one? Was it, what do we got, Joe and or Brian? Are either of them here?
Joe's here.
Where?
Joe Cooler?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we're just gonna hear from one from the law enforcement area. You're both for it, both have the same association name behind your name.
And we'll be brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Clore, Executive Director of the Arizona Police Association. We're here to support this bill. I spoke with the animal cruelty detectives at the Phoenix Police Department. They feel that this bill would be very helpful in terms of addressing the serious issue of animal fighting. As stated earlier, it's very difficult sometimes to actually catch the actual fighting in progress because it is a very closed society. And this bill, they feel, would be very helpful in addressing those issues. And for that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. Do you have a closing comment? Thank goodness. Ready. We are going to move the bill.
Mr. Chair, I move that HB 2062 be returned with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you. Members, you've heard that question. Will the secretary call the roll?
Representative Bartow.
Aye.
Representative DeGrazia.
Aye.
Representative Engel.
Aye, and I thank the sponsor and the Humane Society for bringing the bill.
Representative Fincham.
Aye.
Representative Lawrence.
Since it is my seatmate, comment, sir, who brought the bill and has threatened my life with a no vote, I vote aye.
Put you on a treadmill.
Representative Pollitt.
Aye.
Representative Roberts.
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez.
Aye.
Representative Blackman.
Aye.
Representative Allen.
Aye. Members, by your vote of 10 ayes, 0 nays, 0 absent, all present, you have given House Bill 2062 a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, members, and don't be disappointed. I got some controversial stuff coming through the pipeline.
Oh, that's so good to know.
Oh, man.
Kavanaugh who? Right? Thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned.